Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, we're dealing with HOA Karens, nightmare bosses, and one OP tells a wild story of how they dealt with a nasty roommate. It's a wild episode today, so sit back, relax, and as always, try not to shake your heads too hard at some of these stories. A few years ago, I worked for a company that maintained heavy equipment used by mining and earth-moving companies. One day, I was sitting in a meeting with the CEO of one of our biggest clients. We were discussing ways to reduce their maintenance costs, and let me tell you, the CEO wasn't happy. The guy says to me, "You guys are costing us way too much money." I nod and I say to him, "Your equipment's operating in the middle of a desert, thousands of kilometers away from the nearest service center." I let him know travel costs are a huge part of every repair, but if we can plan maintenance better, we can definitely save you money. The CEO then leans forward and he says, "Really? Then explain the $10,000 invoice from last month. You sent 2 technicians all the way out to change one broken light bulb. Why didn't you just wait until the machine came back?" Now, I'd been expecting that question, and here's what actually happened. The owner of the company was preparing his son to eventually take over the business. To give him some experience, the CEO sent him out to oversee one of the remote sites in the middle of nowhere. Unfortunately, Junior decided that he wanted to throw his weight around. One of the machines had a broken work light. It wasn't affecting production, it wasn't a safety issue, and the machine wasn't due to return for quite a while. Any experienced manager would have waited and fixed it during scheduled maintenance. Instead, Junior demanded it be repaired immediately. When our technicians received the work order, they couldn't believe it. They asked, "Are you sure? This machine's over 2,000 kilometers away. It'll take 2 technicians a 2-day trip each way, and it'll cost thousands of dollars just to replace the light." The answer came back almost immediately. The customer wants it done. Here's the purchase order, go. Well, the customer's always right? So they packed up the truck, loaded all the required equipment, and they drove more than 2,000 kilometers into the desert to replace one single light bulb. They changed it, turned around, drove all the way back, and then sent the invoice. Back in the meeting, the CEO stares at me and he said, "You never should have done that." I simply shrugged and I said to him, "We warned your staff exactly what it was gonna cost. We asked them to confirm they really wanted us to proceed. They approved it and they even issued a purchase order. At that point, we don't get to overrule your managers, we just carry out the work that you've authorized." The CEO frowns and says, "Well, who approved something that stupid?" At that, I smiled and I said to him, "I can send you a copy of the purchase order." And let me tell you, the look on his face was priceless. You could practically see the veins popping out of his forehead. Apparently, it didn't take long to discover exactly who signed off on the repair. I later heard the owner's son was quietly transferred back to head office where he could do a little less damage. Seriously, leave it up to the owner's power-tripping son to cause that much damage, right? And I wonder what Dad's reaction was. But yeah, having worked at places before where the owner's kids thought they ruled the place because my daddy owns the company, this story puts a huge smile on my face. And this person comments, "I once took a 200-kilometer trip to change the channel on TV by the request of the client. We went through this on phone first, and several times I asked the client to check the right source. He claimed that everything was right and the system was broken. He wasn't too happy." And while we're on the topic of bosses making bad decisions, this next one thought that forcing employees to track every minute of their day was a brilliant idea until it completely backfires. Listen to this one. So last summer, I temporarily took a job as a roofing salesperson for a construction company. the job description said that I was managing a book of insurance agents and realtors working referrals. In the interview, the boss was adamant that there was no door knocking, just working relationships and referrals. I took the job and came to learn about a week into my hire that they expected 5+ hours a day of door knocking. Now, I could have quit right away, but I figured that I would give it a go for a bit just to see how things went. The job was full commission with a full weekly vehicle allowance, and I wasn't responsible for working a regular schedule. But eventually, my boss started expecting everyone to work a regular schedule and report at least 40 hours on timesheets. I fought with him about it because as a non-hourly, non-salary employee, there was nothing to report. I got paid only for the work I brought in. Whether I worked 80 or 5 hours, the pay was the same, and there was no contractual obligation of my time. Well, he got upset that I didn't just give in, so he told me that because I hadn't filled out a time card, that he wouldn't give me my weekly vehicle allowance. It's not a huge amount of money, but it was a matter of principle. I don't get paid for time worked, so why do they need to know my hours? My best friend's a labor attorney, so I asked him what I could do, and he said I should just threaten calling the Department of Labor for withholding wages. So I told my boss that I would call the Department of Labor. At this point, I was already in the process of getting hired for a job that I really wanted, so I was planning on quitting soon anyways. So I figured they had it coming for all the lies and deceitful nature of literally everything. They ended up giving me the allowance, and later that day, HR rolled out a policy that said they're now paying out the allowance based on hours logged on timesheets. It was the expectation that we would log 40 hours, and if you don't meet 40 hours, they'll deduct a prorated amount from the vehicle allowance. The policy also said it was retroactive for the previous week. So I didn't get my allowance for that week's pay as I continued to not log everything. I was a little pissed about it. So here's the malicious compliance. That week, our boss made us work about 90 hours, commuting several hours a day each way to a town he wanted us to get some work in. I went into the timesheets and I logged 90 hours for the week. When the pay came that week, I only got the regular allowance for 40 hours. I asked my boss where the rest was, and he said it was a flat rate. So I cited the new policy and I said he owed me based on the hours worked, and I'd be calling the Department of Labor if I didn't get it. They end up giving me the allowance based on 90 hours, and later that week, HR emails the department saying that full commission people are exempt from logging hours, and they would be receiving the flat pay. So I win. I end up quitting a short time later, followed by pretty much the whole sales staff. Everyone quit. Why am I not surprised that everyone left? Like, on top of the stupid rules the guy was making, he was forcing everybody to work 90-hour weeks, which is insane. Like, it was only a matter of time, right? That said, I always love how one person hangs in there and they fight back to make it better for all future employees. Bravo, OP. And this next story, one extremely rude Karen demands to speak to somebody who spoke proper English, and she got exactly what she asked for. This story comes from when I worked in an inbound call center. I handled escalation calls. When someone called in regarding their service plan with complaints that can't be handled with a regular agent's authority, they would get transferred into my team's call queue, and one of us handled it. And here's a little background. I was born and raised in the Southwest. When I was a wee little child, I spoke with a very heavy stutter. It took several years and lots of patience on my mother's part to teach me how to speak normally. The outcome was I had to enunciate all of my words carefully, and thus, I spoke without any hint of a local accent. Later, during my middle school days, I got teased a lot for not having a proper accent. So I decided to teach myself how to speak with the proper accent. I watched a lot of my dad's old black and white westerns to learn the lingo, and then I started talking like Scotty from the original Star Trek series. It was so fun, so I start copying other accents from TVs and movies. I had over a dozen accents under my belt, including German Sergeant Schultz, pirate, and badly dubbed Chinese Kung Fu. There was one bad side effect though. Often, when I'm around a person with a heavy accent, I subconsciously begin to mimic their accent. I don't realize I'm doing it until it's pointed out, and usually, the other person thinks I'm making fun of them or something. To avoid getting punched in the face, I have to do some quick explaining without the borrowed accent. All that said, to the call. So a call comes into my queue and I answer it as normal, kind of. I had been joking around with my supervisor while using an Indian accent, so when I answered the call, I was still using that accent. The woman caller was immediately furious. She starts screaming at the top of her lungs that she had specifically demanded to speak with somebody who spoke English, not well, let's just say her choice of words was heavy on the racist side, and we'll leave it at that. Realizing my error, I dropped the accent, and I tried to talk with the lady normally, but she would have none of it. She continued on a horrible, racist diatribe about foreign call center workers, how there wasn't any proper American English speakers anymore. Not only that, but cussing me up one side, down the other. Now, I've handled a lot of angry phone calls by small-minded people, but there's one hot button that I will not tolerate. The caller starts insulting my parents. I went back into the Indian accent and I said to her, "You wish to talk with somebody who speaks English, correct?" She says, "Yes." I respond, "Not a problem. I'll transfer you to somebody who speaks English, but I must warn you, do not disconnect from the call for any reason whatsoever. We're experiencing a rather large call volume at this time. You're currently at the top of the queue, but if you disconnect and call back, you'll be all the way at the bottom of the call line. And you don't want that, correct?" The woman says, "No, I don't want that." So I say, "Very well. Please stay on the line, and the next available English speaker will be with you shortly. Have a most pleasant day." I then put her on hold. Now, it should be noted that we're not supposed to put callers on hold, but I did, so she would 1. Think she was being transferred, and 2. Make her listen to the horrible hold music. Another thing. Placing a caller on hold immediately sends up a red flag in the call monitoring software. Normally, a supervisor would come storming over and demand answers. My supervisor, however, had his cubicle right next to mine, and being good friends with him, he was very intrigued. He asked, while smiling a wicked smile, "What are you doing?" "Exactly what she demanded," I said. "She wants to talk with somebody who speaks English, then that's exactly what she's gonna get." After 5 minutes, I take the call off hold and I answered with my best Russian accent in place. The woman loses her temper once again, so she goes on hold once again. 5 minutes later, the German accent, then French, then Swedish, then Mario Brothers Italian, so on and so forth. For over an hour, I kept transferring this racist Karen, each time answering the phone with good, bad, and horrible accents speaking English. And the thing is, I thought for sure that she would have caught on around the 30-minute mark when I spoke pirate to her, but she didn't, so I continued. After about an hour and 20 minutes of sending this woman on a verbal tour of the world, this woman ends up sobbing so hard, I could barely make out her distressed words, so I went in for the kill. I answered the phone with a thick southern drawl. She was so happy. She spends a good 10 minutes telling me what a horrible experience she had, just to finally talk to somebody who spoke proper English. When I asked her what I could do for her, she told me what her issue was. It was something so simple that one of the regular agents could have handled it in less than 2 minutes. Finishing up the call, the woman once more thanked me for speaking proper English. That's when I drop back into the heavy Indian accent and I tell her, "Not a problem at all, madam. It was a pleasure to handle your call." I then go on and say, "You know, it's funny. You sound just like a woman I spoke to an hour ago. Isn't life strange?" With a satisfied smile, I hung up during the scream of choking rage. I honestly don't know how that caller made it through 80 minutes before realizing what was happening, but what a call that was nonetheless. And if you guys thought that was satisfying, wait until you hear what happens when an entire HOA tries to bully one homeowner. So at the time, I lived in a lovely cookie-cutter neighborhood with an HOA. This was one of those neighborhoods where they finished like 100 homes in the span of a few weeks, and it was common to see 8 or 10 moving trucks on any given weekend. The neighborhood went from a ghost town to filled in literally a month. In Florida, most HOAs are required to use certified mail when notifying homeowners of violations. My HOA took this a step further, that all notifications to the board would be through certified mail. If you received a violation, the response needs to be in certified mail. Requesting a hearing, certified mail. If you want the bylaws, you guessed it, certified mail. Now, this last one might strike you as odd because how would you know to request the bylaws by certified mail? If you didn't have the bylaws already, you might ask. Let's put a pin in that one for now because upon moving in, they were kind enough to provide the conditions and restrictions outlining what we could and couldn't do, but not the bylaws that told us how to handle violations and complaints. So I move in and everything's great at first. That is, until about the 3rd month when there's a big packet taped to my door, a notice of intent to lien. The packet explains that I was delinquent on a number of violations, many of them repetitive. On the list are things like not keeping the garbage cans out of sight, standing water in between the sides of the homes, parking one of the vehicles in the driveway but over the sidewalk line, bushes not trimmed properly, and unapproved modifications to the doorway as I installed a Ring doorbell camera. The list goes on, but it totals $4,032.12 for violations, late fees, and legal fees. So I immediately email requesting more information, and I don't get a response. I do this for a few days before threatening legal action in some hostile emails, to which I finally get a response indicating that all communications regarding violations will only be addressed via communication methods approved in the bylaws. So of course, I request a copy of the bylaws, to which I get a response that says, all requests for the bylaws must be submitted via approved communication methods as per the bylaws. At this point, I'm about to go postal, but the notice gave me 45 days, and it's only been a couple of days, so I had time to figure this out. Here's a little known fact about developers and HOAs in Florida. The developer is the one that drafts the initial conditions and restrictions, the bylaws, and legal documents, and then hands it off to the board. My developer, whose name starts with a D and ends with a word that sounds like schmorten, was already on my crap list for a number of issues, including improper grading. When I emailed my contacts requesting a copy of the bylaws, I don't think they wanted to add to the growing list of crap that I was emailing them about already, and I had a copy within minutes. That's when I found the certified mail language. Now the wheels were turning because it stated that all communication was to be by certified mail. Each violation was to be filed separately and delivered by certified mail. Each notice of failure to cure and the late fee, certified mail, everything. I had 8 unique violations plus repeat violations over a period of 9 weeks. At a minimum, I should have received like 22 notices via certified mail at around $7 a pop. So cue my malicious compliance. My malicious compliance was two-pronged. My morality has developed to a fashion that if you want to wrongfully take from me, I'm willing to spend just as much as you want to fight you. They wanted $4,000 from me, so I was willing to spend a good amount of that just to mess with them. I took a whole 2 days off from work, and I prepared a little game called F Around and Find Out. So step 1 was to draft a single page. No personal details, but explaining my situation and warning any neighbors going through something similar what the bylaws indicated, and that all homeowners should immediately request a copy of the bylaws via certified mail. I included the HOA's mailing address along with the exact wording that people needed to use in their request. According to the bylaws, the HOA had to respond by certified mail, which meant printing and mailing a full 29-page copy of the bylaws to every homeowner who asked for one. I also explained what anyone facing violations or a notice of intent to lien should do to fight it. Then, I printed about 150 copies of the flyer, one for every house in the neighborhood. I recruited a few neighbors to help me, and together, we went door to door, leaving a copy at nearly every home. The second part of my plan was even better. Instead of fighting all the violations together, I challenged every single one individually. I created a template letter denying each violation, then customized it with the specific details for that offense. Whenever the HOA's own conditions and restrictions showed that I wasn't actually breaking a rule, I quoted the exact section back to them. But the best part was at the end of every letter. I formally requested proof that each violation notice had been sent to me by certified mail, exactly as their own bylaws required. In total, I mailed 23 certified letters, one for each violation, plus another formally contesting the lien. And here's why that mattered. Under Florida law, if a homeowner requests official HOA records, the HOA has to respond within a limited amount of time. Since every one of my letters requested proof that the violation notices had been delivered correctly, they suddenly had 23 separate records requests to deal with. About a week and a half later, I finally get a response, except it wasn't a certified letter. It was an email. The email basically said that every violation was valid, that I still had 25 days to comply, and if I didn't, they would move forward with the lien. And I replied with one sentence. I wrote back, all communication regarding violations must be sent using the approved communication methods outlined in your bylaws. In other words, certified mail. Now, they had to respond to all 23 disputes, including every document I'd requested, and send each response individually by certified mail. They never did. So I sent 23 more certified letters, informing them that they were now violating both their own bylaws and Florida HOA law, and that I intend to pursue legal action if they didn't stop. And that's when things completely fell apart. I later heard from somebody whose spouse was on the HOA board that nearly 100 homeowners had followed the instructions from my flyer, and they requested copies of the bylaws by certified mail. At the same time, the HOA is already dealing with dozens of active violations and lien notices. Now, every single homeowner was fighting them using certified mail. The HOA had created a system where every piece of communication had to be handled by certified mail, and suddenly, they were drowning in the very process they had written themselves. Eventually, the legal costs and mailing expenses became so expensive that the HOA burned through a huge chunk of its reserve fund. The board was voted out and replaced. It also turned out they hadn't been following their own rules in the first place. They hadn't been sending violation notices by certified mail at all. In many cases, the homeowners hadn't received any warning whatsoever. They'd simply been hit with a notice of intent to lien and hoped that they would pay without asking questions. And the reason why they were so desperate for money, well, there was an empty lot at the entrance of the neighborhood that a commercial developer wanted to buy. Unfortunately for the board members, it sat directly in front of many of their homes. Rather than risk having a gas station or another business being built there, they were trying to raise the money by piling fines on their own neighbors so the HOA could buy the land instead. As for me, the lien quietly disappeared. Even better, the developer, who had ignored my drainage complaints for months, suddenly fixed everything. They regraded both sides of my house, installed French drains, replaced all the sod, and took care of every outstanding issue. I only lived there for another 8 months before selling the house. In total, I mailed 46 certified letters, spent about $350, and burned 2 vacation days. And it was some of the best money I've ever spent. Once again, the fact that OP fought so hard and they won in the end, and they saved who knows how many people from paying those unnecessary liens, props to you, OP. But yeah, another reason to dislike HOAs, right? Let's just find the people who live here to get money so our views won't be obstructed by a commercial building. And this last story, OP fights back against nasty Karen roommates. I'm a freshman in college. The apartment I live in on campus has a small living room with a connected kitchen and 3 bedrooms. I share this dorm with 3 girls, who I'll refer to as Ashley, Becca, and Chloe. Ashley and Chloe share the large bedroom, and Becca has a small bedroom next to Ashley and Chloe's room to themselves. And I have the other small bedroom to myself. My bedroom's door has a habit of locking itself when you close it. It's a detail that comes into play later. Also, the only furniture that was provided by campus was our beds, the stove, the microwave, the counters in the kitchen, the shower, the sink, the toilet, and a desk, along with a small chair that goes with the desk. There's also a lockable cabinet for each student in their bedroom, so anything else we wanted in the apartment we had to bring ourselves. The way it worked out was I brought most of the stuff in the living room and the kitchen, and remember this, it'll be important later. I brought the fridge, the TV stand, the Xbox, and both the couch and love seat myself. Becca brought a coffee maker and toaster, and Chloe brought a stereo boombox. Becca's a pretty cool roommate, but she's a double major, so she's not around the dorm all that much. That said, it didn't take long for the issues with the other roommates to begin though. Ashley and Chloe had a habit that drove me insane. Besides constantly inviting people over without asking me or Becca, they also treated anything I left in the living room like it was garbage. If I stepped away for even a couple of minutes, they would grab whatever I left behind and toss it into my bedroom without saying a word. At first, I let it slide. It was little things, like a pair of shoes by the door, a jacket over a couch, nothing worth starting a fight over. But one day, I ran down the hall to grab my laundry. I was gone for maybe 2 minutes, and as I walked back into the apartment, I literally watched Ashley throw my open laptop into my bedroom. Thankfully, it wasn't damaged, but that was strike number 1. Strike number 2 came just a few days later. Ashley and Chloe invited a bunch of people over for a movie night. Before everyone arrived, they decided to clean up by throwing my phone, my keys, and my backpack into my room, and then they shut the door behind them. Now, my bedroom door automatically locked whenever it closed. The only key I had was attached to my keys, which they had just thrown inside the locked room. I end up having to call our resident assistant to let me back in. And because of the dorm's policy, I got hit with a $50 lockout fee. And you might be thinking, well, maybe they didn't know the door locked itself. Except they absolutely did. In fact, Ashley was the one who figured out why it kept locking in the first place. She knew exactly what would happen. And to make matters worse, my phone screen cracked from being thrown. The phone still worked, but I couldn't afford to replace it, especially after paying that ridiculous $50 fine, and that was strike number 2. The final strike happened a week later. So 3 days a week, I have a 7 a.m. lecture, so I have to get to bed early. Around midnight before one of these classes, Ashley and Chloe barged into my room and they woke me up. For the first time ever, they didn't throw stuff into my room. Instead, they actually asked me to move it. I figured that I'd accidentally left my backpack or something important in the living room, but no. Ashley points at my tennis shoes sitting by the front door. And the funny part is my shoes were sitting right beside 3 pairs of Ashley's shoes and 4 pairs of Chloe's shoes. And then they had the nerve to lecture me. Chloe actually said to me, "You should really keep all of your stuff in your room. We don't want to see it." And Ashley chimes in and says, "Yeah, all of it belongs in your bedroom." And this is when an idea popped into my head. That's when I decided to make sure there would be no confusion. I quietly start recording the conversation on my phone. I asked, "So you're saying that I should move all of my property into my room?" Ashley replies, "Yes." I ask again and I say, "Are you sure? Everything?" Chloe answers, "Everything." And that's when I smiled. By the next morning, I went to class like normal. By the time I got home around 11, Ashley and Chloe wouldn't be back for at least another 4 hours, which is perfect. So I called a few friends and we got to work. We moved absolutely everything I owned into my bedroom. The TV, the game consoles, the furniture, decoration, kitchen supplies, everything. I texted Becca to let her know what I was doing, and she immediately replied asking if I could move all of her things into her room too. She even suggested putting the love seat in her room since there wasn't enough space in mine. I was more than happy to help. By the time we finished, the living room was almost completely empty. The only things left were a couple of coolers full of Ashley and Chloe's food and Chloe's Bluetooth boombox on the floor. Needless to say, Ashley and Chloe completely lost it when they got home. They immediately ran to get one of the RAs. The RA asked why I emptied the apartment. Without saying much, I pulled out my phone and I played the recording from the night before. Then, I showed her that every single item we'd moved belonged to either me or Becca. She listened to the recording and then looked around the apartment. She then turned to Ashley and Chloe and just simply shrugged. She says there isn't really anything I could do. He only moved his own property into his room exactly like you asked. If you want the furniture and entertainment stuff back, you should either apologize or go buy your own. And that was a week ago, and I still haven't gotten an apology. They haven't replaced any of the missing furniture either. And none of their friends come over anymore because there's basically nothing to do in the apartment now. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/MaliciousCompliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where psycho Karen bosses think they rule the workplace and employees are fighting back. Guys, if you missed that episode, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.